Welcome to Buns, Burgers, and Big Ideas, the go-to podcast for aspiring and seasoned leaders in the quick service restaurant industry. Each week, we serve up actionable insights and proven strategies to help you lead smarter, build stronger teams, and elevate operations. Whether you're taking your first steps into leadership or refining your expertise, we're here to fuel your growth and spark big ideas. Let's dig in.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Buns, Burgers, and Big Ideas. I'm here with my co-host, Eric Jaworski, and I'm Riley Shine. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Miss Amanda Kieper. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
It's the day of love.
It is. Amanda is a friend of our organization, and we're excited to have you.
Thank you.
She's been teaching public speaking and leadership development at Rock Valley College for over 25 years. Mm-hmm. She's also a clinical mental health counselor and a corporate trainer who loves helping people uncover those blind spots and recognize and break those unhealthy patterns and, just try to lead a good life.
Yes.
So thank you for being here.
Yes, you're welcome. So at the end of that, I specifically want to help people lead lives with fewer regrets.
Yes.
So on a very personal level, I lost my mom at 62 years old. And yesterday was her birthday. So it's really...
Happy birthday, Mama.
Yes, heavenly birthday, Mama. Mm-hmm. So it's really top of mind. And I'm so passionate about helping people understand how to live lives where they feel like they're thriving. Because I feel that when we don't spend enough time doing that, our minds and our bodies can get sick. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I feel happened with her. I'm thrilled to be here today and talk about a very important topic.
I love it.
It's just when you start to really know yourself, when you're able to dig into yourself a little bit more, it just opens up all sorts of avenues that we just aren't aware of.
Yeah, and what we're talking about today is emotional intelligence, and not knowing yourself and not taking the time to unstuff some of the ways of being can really have negative consequences. And so there's this term emotional intelligence that's really sort of the buzz right now in organizations and leadership development. And I'm positive that's why you asked me to come on the show.
Absolutely.
I listened to your last episode about emotional intelligence. You did a beautiful job taking the audience through some examples of what could happen when someone's not happy. How do you handle those situations? And I'm here today to add depth to that conversation.
Absolutely. So when you say emotional intelligence for like you and what you're able to do with your different resources and teams, what does that mean to you?
So I was trained in an organization, and David Corey is the author of the tool that I use. It's Emotional Intelligence EQ 2.0. And there's an assessment that goes with his work. You can also purchase a book. We can put the links in the show notes.
Absolutely.
But his emotional intelligence assessment tool is very, very in-depth. There's no way in a short podcast that I could go into all of that, but I do want to introduce you to some components. So to get started, his methodology, his assessment tool has several different components. One is self-perception, how we see ourselves, self-expression, interpersonal dynamics, decision-making, and how we manage stress, so stress management. And then under each of those categories, there are subcategories. And what I have found in Riley's introduction, he said that I've been teaching public speaking and leadership development, counseling, training. What I have found in working with people is that the biggest barrier to developing as a leader is your blind spots. In fact, I'm often invited to go train at companies and do team building in leadership development, and the leader is the one that needs the most work, and they're hiring for the team.
Okay.
And so it is so important that when you're looking at organizational cultural behavior and health and wellness, that the leader is looking as deeply or even more deeply into self. Because if the team sees that there are some huge blind spots, they will quickly lose respect and not be engaged in the process. So the first measure or the first element that we need to consider when we're thinking about emotional intelligence is our self-perception. How do we see ourselves, and what contributes to how we see ourselves? For most of us, it's our parents or our primary caregivers. There's a term called reflected appraisal, And that is, I see myself the way I see you seeing me.
Okay.
Let me say that again. I see myself the way I see you seeing me.
Whoa.
Right? So if you think about how is self-perception developed from a very young age, it's what our loved ones tell us about ourselves.
Okay.
Right? Oh, Eric, you are so inquisitive.
Yeah.
That's amazing how detail-oriented you are. You just have a gift at that. You just have a gift at that, Eric.
Sure.
So now little Eric, what does he do? I'm inquisitive. I am detail-oriented.
How did you know?
Right?
So this is all built off. So I love what you're saying there. And just to help our audience and myself understand this a little bit more, as we're growing up, that's where we really get a lot of this self
Yes. Perception.
awareness. Okay.
Self-perception.
Perception, not awareness.
Correct.
Okay.
Self-perception and self-awareness are different. So self-perception is when I look in the mirror, what do I see and why do I see it? And it's usually based on the relationship interactions that we had as a young child.
Okay.
Okay. So when my niece was really young, she was like 2 or 3 years old, and she would open the refrigerator door and she would say, medicine, medicine. And then she just had this amazing grasp of language. And people, her whole life, Trisha, you are so smart. You are so smart. So Trisha grows up and she wants to be a doctor because she's so smart.
Sure.
Right? Versus take the child that grows up in a home and he doesn't have healthy, emotionally intelligent parents and they don't have impulse control and their emotions are all over the place. The child becomes dysregulated because their nervous system is all jumping because they don't know what's going to happen when mom or dad walks in the home. And then the messages they're getting from mom and dad are, you're a bother, you're in my way, I'm not attuned to you. Children that grow up in alcoholic homes, they are often not as emotionally intelligent because even though the child may not know that mom or dad is drunk, they can sense that the parent is not present. And so the child internalizes their self-perception that I'm not a priority. I'm a bother.
Sure.
Right? And so then you grow up and you develop habits that create armor for how to deal with being uncomfortable.
Well, I imagine, too, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but like that armor you're talking about, those layers of, protection of their self-perception.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
Now all of a sudden it's going to take a lot more work for them to uncover that when they get to that point.
Great point, Riley, because a lot of people, when I coach people and when I counsel people, they don't even realize the impact that childhood had on their self-perception.
Okay.
They feel like, oh, I'm an adult now. It should just be a different scenario and I should look at other factors. Yeah. You cannot separate the child from the adult. So I know I'm getting really clinical right now.
and
this is my counseling hat coming off, but I call it the Great Reckoning. And if you don't reckon with the influences that those formative relationships had in childhood, and then it goes into middle school, and then it's your friends. And then some people stop developing in that area because they had such bad experiences. And so then when conflict bubbles up in their life, and they need to solve problems, that's why we talk about emotional intelligence, is how do we handle interpersonal relationships? Then those people don't have the tools because by that time their nervous system is so hijacked that their amygdala, the part in the brain that is responsible for fight or flight, it's like a thermostat that's on high all the time.
Okay.
Right? So this conversation, if you really want to understand emotional intelligence, it definitely has a biological, psychosocial element.
Yeah. And as we've kind of grown with our organization and we're using some of the assessments, because there's plenty of assessments out there.
Oh, definitely.
But I think you make a very valid point around the blind spots and that self-perception that they have. Because working, even with myself, it's been really hard to convince myself that maybe I don't know everything I know. So how do we have that conversation? How do you have that conversation with other leaders that you're working with where it's like, this is a blind spot and you really need to see this?
So I think that coaching is really, really important, and having training workshops with people and introducing them to self-assessments like this or research like this is a great tool. You want them to feel safe about having the conversation. Yeah. And if you call them in the office and you're like, look, you're really missing the boat, this is problematic, your behavior is off-putting, you are not demonstrating professionalism, that's one way to do it. But I'd rather do it where they come to their own conclusions. There's a lot of research out there. Mel Robbins has a great podcast and a book called Let Them. And it's about the idea that you can't change people. They have to change themselves. You can guide the process and you can inspire them, but they need to see that they have some area or opportunity for growth and development, because if you tell them, they're going to defend themselves. They're going to use one of Brene Brown's... Correct. Yeah. They're going to go into fight or flight. And then like Brene Brown says in her book, Dare to Lead, we're going to put up armor. Yeah. We're going to fight, flight, or flee, or freeze. So I'm either going to be like, to me... Okay, Eric, really? You want to talk about me? And then, in organizations, Brene Brown says what we'll do is we'll go talk about you instead of to you. Yeah, right.
That becomes a huge problem.
Which is also another indicator of low emotional intelligence.
Sure.
So to answer your question, I think you need to provide organic ways for people in your organization that you care about to look at themselves.
Yeah. And as we go down that journey, it is really that fight or flight. And, I got defensive. I used to work with people, right? Hey, you're not seeing this, but I'm seeing this. And it created really bad conversations.
So this is a journey. And you're right. Yeah. I know in previous conversations that we've had privately, we've talked about how we, had so many blind spots ourselves individually as we've grown in leadership development. And I remember one time in my early 20s, I went to a counselor and my husband and I were arguing about issues. And he said this to me and I'll never forget it because, wow. He said, Amanda, when your husband brings up an issue, you're like a cat arching its back and going...
That's a great name.
I love that.
Nobody's going to forget that. And he was not wrong. Well, guess what? I grew up with an alcoholic father who was a Vietnam veteran who had undiagnosed PTSD. So I had no role models for what it's like to handle yourself when you feel stress and upset. Yeah. And so a lot of what we're looking at when we look at our managers in our organizations is we're looking at how are they conditioned to deal with conflict? How are they conditioned to deal with their emotions? Many people, to talk about emotional intelligence, first of all, people don't really have language for emotions. They usually say mad, sad, happy. They don't have depth and breadth for words. So I did this experiment with my students at Rock Valley College. I teach at a community college, and we were talking about experiences that they've had recently that have really just angered them. And then I put up an emotion wheel that you can Google an emotion wheel, and it'll give you the primary emotions in the center. And so say we start at angry. So say that story that you were talking about in your last podcast where someone comes up and they get their fries at the counter and the fries are cold. You're perceiving them because you don't have a lot of emotional intelligence as a manager. You're perceiving them as like, high maintenance, get a grip. This is, we served you a product. Don't you see that we have 20 people in line behind you?
Fries.
It's just fries. You came in at the busiest time of the day. Yep. But then if you talk to that person, and if you actually talk to them, like maybe it's not anger. Maybe it's another emotion that's connected to anger. Can you think of any others?
Frustrated.
Yeah, I'm just frustrated because I'm hungry and this is the one time of the day I'm going to be able to eat and I didn't get what I expected. I'm just frustrated. Why can't things work out my way? And they had 3 other things that happened to them before the fries, right? that is contributing to how they're responding.
It's usually not just the fries.
It's not the fries. Yeah. That should be a podcast title. It's not the fries.
Good. I got it. I like it. So as we work on our self-perception, as we take some assessments, as we work on the EQ itself, how do we start making progress? How do we be more aware? How do we keep this alive? Because I've had people take the assessments. I've done it myself, and cool, we checked the box, we went over it, and then the next day you're not really looking at it.
Yeah, I think that being engaged in the material is really good. I'm a huge fan of podcasts. If you can find a podcast related to the topic or area in your life that you feel like you really have some opportunity for growth and development, pop that podcast in for 30 minutes and learn more about that topic. Self-reflection. Asking questions. So I brought the assessment tool with me, and I wanted to share some of the indicators that would let you know that you really have some opportunity for growth and development. So when I was talking about self-perception, one of the elements that is affecting self-perception is your self-regard. How you feel about yourself, your self-esteem. Okay. So some indicators of low self-regard are self-doubting, being very self-critical, being unhappy or insecure about your contribution or abilities to the team, lacking self-esteem. One way, and this is, I think this is super interesting, without balance, too much self-regard. So let's go to the other side. What if a person has too much self-regard? What, before I even say these out loud, you experience someone as insecure, self-doubting, self-critical, and you're like, oh, they really have low self-regard. Yeah. Can someone have too much self-regard?
They can come across as pompous, I would imagine.
Yeah, pompous, cocky, maybe.
Pompous, cocky, arrogant, narcissistic, overconfident.
Maybe all of what I used to be.
Oh, interesting. Okay. What a transformation. Yeah. So what I really want you to remember in terms of emotional intelligence is that it's not, I'm looking at your soundboard right now, Riley. Emotional intelligence, the authors, David Corey and others who created this assessment, they use the analogy of a soundboard.
Okay.
So self-regard is something that maybe you need to tweak and turn it up a little bit. And sometimes in some situations, you need to turn the self-regard down a little bit.
Okay.
Can I share? When I started with the organization, I literally had a manager that would call me cocky, right? Like that was their nickname for me.
Wow.
It's just, so it's interesting that can really go both ways, because a lot of the people that we work with within our organization, our leadership, it's the opposite. They don't have that confidence that I see in them. Like they have the ability, but maybe not that confidence. Or, they look at themselves and they just have so much doubt, even though the results might be there.
Yeah, I think that's a great personal example. First, it shows your humility, and it reminds us all that transformation is possible. So there's hope. You have to want to change and see a reason to change. So let me ask you, how were you inspired? Why did you decide, I need to change?
You can only get so much out of yourself, and the more I learned about myself, like the more I did, I poured into myself. I learned more. I grew more. I did more training around the assessment stuff, and really just poured into. I have to be better. Like I have to personally be better. And then as I did that, now I can just see it in others. Like how do we now support others? So going from just more of a what's in it for me leadership style to that servant leadership is just that's where the transformation really came in.
Well, I think as you start to grow and transform, your focus becomes less self-focused and it becomes other-focused.
Yeah.
It's part of the self-actualization model, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to ask yourself good questions on this journey. Okay. One of the other things as a part of, I'm going to just give you some other examples. Emotional self-awareness. How do we know someone has great emotional self-awareness? They will how do we know that they do not? Excuse me. They will ignore their own emotional needs and motivations. They won't have a vocabulary for emotions. They will be surprised by others' reactions and to their emotional states. They're not self-aware. They don't realize how their emotions are impacting the organization.
It's true. And a lot of it, that comes down to tone even. It's not so much what you're saying, it's the delivery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 90% of the message, I teach interpersonal communication as well. And in some studies, up to 90% of the meaning of the message is nonverbal. It's how you say it. So another thing that I have to really throw out there is it's Valentine's Day, so I have to bring in couples, okay? So part of couples who are really thriving, they have mastered emotional intelligence in a couple of different ways as studied by John and Julie Gottman. So these couples, these authors, they can predict divorce with over 94% of the time. You can look up a book or any resource by Julie and John Gottman, and it's called The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. Over 45 years, they've been studying couples, and they have found 4 communication behaviors that will put your relationship in the ditch if you do them too much. So one of them is contempt. So talking to your person like you are so disgusted with them that you could spit in their face. That's contempt is anger and disgust. Another one is defensive. Someone comes to you with a problem and you don't take any accountability whatsoever with what they just brought to you. You defend and deflect. Yeah. Another one is criticism. You attack the person instead of the issue, what is going on. And then the final one, which is most troublesome for men, is stonewalling. So when you completely shut down and refuse to communicate.
Yeah.
That causes heart rate to go up. Yes.
Yeah. I can't handle him. Just walk out.
Right. I'm out of here.
That was my dad.
So, right. So my dad, your dad, so fight, flight, or flee. Your dad flee. My dad fight. Right? So when we're talking about emotional intelligence, we also have to think about the behaviors that lead us to assess the emotional intelligence. Now, it's super, super important for me to communicate that we will never be perfect. We are not robots. So what Gottman found, and he also does leadership in the workplace, what he also found is that as long as you have an overriding positive sentiment, that you're going to be okay. He actually coded it so specifically that it's a 5-to-1 positive to negative communication encounters. This happens in the relationship and also in the workplace. So as long as I'm working with you and we're on a team and you're like, what's going on, Riley? How was your weekend? And Eric, you're going to come to the event tonight with us, and I'm including you and I'm thanking you for helping me. And then you get slammed, right? And you just get really short. And you say something you wish you wouldn't have said. Yeah. Well, if you have poured into me in a positive way more often than when you got short with me, now I have a bank account. He calls it a bank account.
Okay. We've talked about that.
I have a bank account of positive interactions where I can now tolerate when you lost your cool.
Okay.
So emotional intelligence is not about being perfect, but it's about when I do lose my cool and treat you less than, I'm going to come back to you after I calm down and regulate my nervous system. I'm going to be like, hey, I could have handled that better.
And I think for me, too, it was about being okay with going to those people and saying, hey, I made a mistake. Because sometimes we're so much in it, or we think we have to be somebody we're not. So
talk about that, because I think that's equally important. Why would you make the assumption? Why did you have the belief that I won't go back and tell them that I made the mistake?
Well, and I think that perception that we have to have, right? That growing up in the fast food world, we don't always have that coaching, that training, right? Like I didn't have necessarily the emotional balance that I have today. So I thought that I always had to be right. I thought that I always had to prove myself as being that perfect person. And it just gets so ingrained in your system that it just makes it really hard. And I still struggle with it today.
But if I were coaching you and we had time, I'd say, why though? Yeah. Why is it so important that you were perfect? Image management? Yeah. You were trying to prove to yourself that you belonged here, that you were supposed to have a seat at the table?
Sure. There's a little bit of that imposter syndrome, I would imagine. And I'm sure we could talk for hours.
We could talk for hours. We could talk for hours about all of our development and ways of being. Yeah. That's why I love this stuff.
But it's so much easier to just be and to really dive into yourself and to do the things around that self-perception and the self-expression and the things that you're talking about today. So.
And, you asked the question, which is, how do you get better around these things? I want to keep talking about that. You surround yourself with people. John Maxwell says, if you're the smartest person at the table, you need to find a new table. So one of the things for the up-and-coming managers and people that want to be in leadership someday, who's pouring into you? You're always pouring into other people in those leadership roles, but who is pouring into you? Who are your confidants? John Maxwell really believes in the mastermind. Getting together with like-minded people from your organizations and other organizations and talking about concepts like emotional intelligence. Yep. That's really, really important. And I will also say that mentorship. I'm sure that if I had to ask each of you what really inspired you to be who you are, someone believed in you before you believed in yourself. I guaranteed it.
100%.
100%.
Yeah.
So we could talk about this all day,
right?
That's what I'm saying. Today is just a introduction to some of the concepts.
Perfect.
So as you can see, listeners, there's so much depth and breadth to emotional intelligence, and especially in our workforce, where we might not know those blind spots. So where else can we start, or where can we look to further this conversation with our teams?
So I am a huge advocate of podcasts. So type in the keyword emotional intelligence in your podcast wherever you find them, and search for one that you really like. I am also a huge advocate of personal mentoring. So go to someone that you really respect and say, I need some feedback.
Yeah.
You know, I think that I do these things well, but I have a feeling that I might do these other things not so great. What do you think? Right?
Solicit that feedback.
People. Which is really, really hard to do. I think you two talked about it in the last podcast, like doing a 360 review. Yeah. Wow, it takes some tough skin. But on the other side of that is so much freedom. As you grow and you start to, I was talking to one of my students and we were talking about transformation and what transformation looks like. And I remember when Noah was little, I have a 19-year-old son, almost 19, he probably was 8 years old, and he had me get a chair, and we would have to sit down and look at a tree and watch cicadas transform.
Oh, sure.
For hours.
Yeah. Fun.
So fun.
Fun. Great times.
Yeah.
I mean,
For someone.
He was fascinated by it.
That's great.
But we would literally watch the cicada shed its skin. And if you want to become a better version of self, you have to be able to have conversations with people that will give you really good feedback about what am I doing well and what could I do better.
Yeah.
So solicit feedback, listen to podcasts. If you can find an emotional intelligence assessment, that would be fantastic. There are many, many books. David Corey has books out there, and then also Daniel Goleman. He is sort of the most trending author on emotional intelligence as well. Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, talks about emotional intelligence, a great book as well. And I'm a huge fan. Obviously, you know, Riley told you that I'm a counselor. I'm a huge fan of personal coaching and personal counseling. So find someone and just be honest with them. Let down your mask and remember that the best version of you is the most authentic version of you. Yeah. And if we can get there, now we're really in a sweet spot.
Nice.
Yeah, I would agree, Amanda. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
I'm excited for our growth. I'm excited for our team's growth here, and couldn't thank you enough for taking the time.
So
we'll
fun.
probably have you again.
Well, I love it.
If you're willing.
I don't like to talk much, but
Thank you very much, guys.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on Buns, Burgers, and Big Ideas. We hope today's episode inspired fresh ideas for your leadership journey. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and keep learning with us as we continue to explore leadership in the QSR world. Until next time, take care and lead well.